The clock had struck well past midnight when I found myself driving along a stretch of highway that was unfamiliar. I had just left an old friend's place in Denver, heading back to my apartment in Salt Lake City. The drive was routine, one I'd completed countless times before. But tonight, there was something in the air that made it feel different. The weather wasn't doing me any favors. What began as a light drizzle quickly turned into a torrential downpour, the kind that made visibility near impossible, even with the wipers at full speed. The road became slick and treacherous, the headlights of my car slicing through the thick darkness in vain. The highway stretched endlessly, devoid of any other vehicles. There was no distant hum of traffic, no signs of life, just the incessant beating of rain against the roof and windows. Hours passed, and my exhaustion caught up with me. My eyelids grew heavier by the minute, and I found myself swerving slightly as I fought to stay alert. The familiar landmarks blurred past me, and the overwhelming desire to pull over was becoming harder to ignore. It wasn't long before I decided to take an exit off the highway, hoping to find a place to rest. I spotted a dim light in the distance that I assumed was a gas station, but when I pulled off, I found no sign of the station. Instead, there was a small diner, the lights flickering weakly through the downpour. It had the nostalgic charm of those roadside diners I used to stop at during long trips, the kind that promised warmth and a brief respite from the isolation of the road. I could already imagine the comfort of a hot drink and a quiet place to gather my thoughts, so I pulled into the parking lot, eager for a break. The wind howled through the trees, and I noticed how empty the parking lot was. There were no cars, not even the trucks I usually saw parked at diners like this. A wave of unease washed over me, but I quickly brushed it off. It was late, and I just needed to rest. I walked inside and was greeted by the smell of stale coffee and grease. The diner was mostly empty, save for an older woman behind the counter, who gave me a tired smile. "Welcome, hon, you're the only one here tonight," she said, her voice thick with a southern accent. I nodded, and after a brief moment, I ordered coffee and some scrambled eggs. I took a seat by the window, my back to the room, glancing out at the rain-slicked parking lot. The silence in the diner was unsettling. There was no music, no conversation, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rattle of the rain. When my food arrived, the waitress placed it on the counter in front of me, then looked at me with a peculiar expression. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice suddenly quiet. I looked up, a bit confused. "Yeah, just tired. Long drive." She nodded slowly, then hesitated. "You're headed down Highway 50, right?" I froze. "Yeah, how'd you know?" She gave me a long, almost sad look. "Be careful. There's something about that road. Something strange." I felt my heart rate pick up, a chill running through me. "What do you mean?" "The road's fine, right?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at the window, her eyes narrowing as if she was seeing something that I couldn't. "It's not the road," she said softly. "It's the people. Or maybe it's not people at all." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" The waitress seemed to snap out of her trance and smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Nothing, hon, forget I said anything. It's just a long road." I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I paid for my meal, quickly leaving a tip on the counter, and headed back to the car. The rain had stopped, but the night felt colder than before. As I pulled back onto the highway, I couldn't stop thinking about the woman's words. Something strange. What did she mean? Was she just another eccentric diner worker? Or was there more to this place than I realized? The further I drove, the more I started to feel it. The road felt different now, like I was being watched. The trees lining the highway seemed to lean closer, casting long shadows that stretched far past the reach of my headlights. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of something, just a flash, like a figure darting across the road. But when I looked, there was nothing. I tried to push the thoughts from my mind, focusing on the road ahead. But I was still on edge. My mind raced through 1,000 possibilities. Then, I saw it. Up ahead, about a mile down the road, was a figure standing at the edge of the highway. A person, it seemed, just standing there in the dark. I slowed down, squinting through the windshield, trying to make out the details. As I got closer, I could see that it was a woman, tall, thin, wearing a long white dress, standing perfectly still, facing the highway. I pulled my foot off the gas and instinctively reached for my phone. I wasn't sure if I was being paranoid or if something was wrong, but I couldn't help it. I needed to make sure the woman was okay. When I was about 30 feet from her, I stopped the car. She didn't move. I rolled down the window, trying to get her attention. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out, my voice shaky. She didn't respond. I took a cautious step forward, and she stepped back, disappearing behind the tree. "Wait!" I shouted, running to where she had been. But when I got there, she was gone. There were no footprints, no sign that anyone had been there at all. The beeping started again, louder this time, and coming from multiple directions. It echoed through the woods, disorienting me further. I spun around, trying to pinpoint the source, but it was everywhere. Panic set in. I broke into a run, no longer caring about the trail or my bearings. I just needed to get out. The trees seemed to close in on me, their branches clawing at my arms and legs. Then, I tripped. I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of me. When I looked up, I saw the phone lying a few feet away. The screen was glowing, displaying a new message. "Why didn't you listen?" I scrambled to my feet and kept running. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but I didn't stop until I burst out of the woods and into the parking lot. My car was the only one there. I jumped in, locked the doors, and sped out of there without looking back. When I got home, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was a stress-induced hallucination, or maybe someone really was messing with me. I even searched online for stories about strange experiences in the Rockies, but nothing came close to what I'd gone through. Then, 2 weeks later, I heard it again. The beeping. It was faint at first, coming from somewhere in my house. I searched every room, every drawer, but I couldn't find the source. It grew louder, echoing through the walls, until I couldn't take it anymore. I ran out of the house and didn't return for days. Even now, I hear it sometimes. In the middle of the night, when everything is still. A faint, rhythmic beeping, reminding me of that day in the woods. It was well past 2 a.m. when I found myself driving down a stretch of highway in the Nevada desert. I had just wrapped up a visit to some old friends in Denver, and I was heading back to my home in California. The road felt endless, stretching into the night, and I felt the fatigue of a long drive settling in. The highway was a lonely, desolate ribbon of asphalt, with no signs of life for miles, just the distant glow of the city fading behind me. The weather wasn't doing me any favors. A light drizzle began to fall at first, but soon turned into a torrential downpour. My windshield wipers couldn't keep up. The rain battered the car with an almost unnatural intensity, making it nearly impossible to see anything beyond the headlights. The road was slick, the tires screeching every time I hit the brakes. The darkness enveloped me, as if the car was the only thing in existence. I felt completely isolated, like the world had ceased to exist outside my vehicle. The miles passed slowly. I was tired, but I pressed on, my mind wandering. The hum of the tires on the wet asphalt became a monotonous background to my thoughts. I was trying to push through it, but the exhaustion was getting worse. My eyelids were heavy, and every few minutes, I found myself drifting into that gray area between sleep and wakefulness. I glanced at the clock. 2:15 a.m. It was hard to keep track of time when the road was endless and the rain kept pounding relentlessly. I had been on the road for hours, and I started searching for a place to stop. I needed rest, coffee, and maybe a bite to eat. Off in the distance, through the haze of rain, I spotted a faint light. I thought it was a gas station, but as I got closer, I realized it was a diner. Its neon sign flickered weakly in the rain. I was relieved to see it. It was the only sign of civilization in miles. I pulled into the parking lot and parked near the entrance. The diner was almost empty. There were no cars in the lot, just my own. I hesitated for a moment, feeling uneasy, but chalked it up to my exhaustion. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, and I was greeted by the smell of stale coffee and grease. It was quiet, too quiet. A woman stood behind the counter, an older lady with graying hair and a tired smile. "Welcome, hon, you're the only one here tonight," she said, her voice thick with a southern accent. I nodded, giving a half-hearted smile, and ordered coffee and a sandwich. I took a seat near the window, my back to the room, glancing out at the rain-slicked parking lot. The silence in the diner was unsettling. There was no music, no conversation, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rattle of the rain. The waitress brought my food, and when she placed it on the counter, her eyes lingered on me for a moment too long. She smiled again, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Everything all right?" I asked, trying to break the tension. She paused before responding, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're headed down Highway 50, aren't you?" I froze. How did she know that? "Yeah," I said slowly. "How'd you know?" She didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted past me, staring out the window. The diner's light flickered again, casting an eerie glow on her face. "There's something strange about that road," she said, her voice tight. "Something not right. You should be careful. A lot of people who drive that road don't come back." I felt a chill run down my spine. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to laugh it off, but I couldn't shake the unease creeping in. She seemed to hesitate before answering, her eyes now narrowed, focused on something I couldn't see. "It's not the road, hon, it's the people, or maybe something else. It's a road that takes more than it gives." Her words hung in the air, thick with meaning I didn't quite understand. I nodded, paying for my meal, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Something was wrong. I left the diner quickly and returned to my car, locking the doors behind me. The rain had stopped, but the fog had set in thick and heavy. I drove back onto the highway, still unsettled by the woman's warning. The road seemed different now, more oppressive, like the very air was thick with something. The darkness stretched out endlessly, and for the first time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It wasn't long before I saw her. At first, she was a mere silhouette on the side of the highway, standing still in the distance. A person, it seemed, just standing there in the dark. I slowed down, squinting through the windshield, trying to make out the details. I couldn't tell if she was real or a figment of my exhausted imagination. As I got closer, I could see that it was a woman, tall, thin, wearing a long white dress, standing perfectly still, facing the highway. I pulled my foot off the gas and instinctively reached for my phone. I wasn't sure if I was being paranoid or if something was wrong, but I couldn't help it. I needed to make sure the woman was okay. When I was about 30 feet from her, I stopped the car. She didn't move. I rolled down the window, trying to get her attention. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out, my voice shaky. She didn't respond. I took a cautious step forward, and she stepped back, disappearing behind a tree. "Wait!" I shouted, running to where she had been. But when I got there, she was gone. There were no footprints, no sign that anyone had been there at all. The beeping started again, louder this time, and coming from multiple directions. It echoed through the woods, disorienting me further. I spun around, trying to pinpoint the source, but it was everywhere. Panic set in. I broke into a run, no longer caring about the trail or my bearings. I just needed to get out. The trees seemed to close in on me, their branches clawing at my arms and legs. Then, I tripped. I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of me. When I looked up, I saw the phone lying a few feet away. The screen was glowing, displaying a new message. "Why didn't you listen?" I scrambled to my feet and kept running. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but I didn't stop until I burst out of the woods and into the parking lot. My car was the only one there. I jumped in, locked the doors, and sped out of there without looking back. When I got home, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was a stress-induced hallucination, or maybe someone really was messing with me. I even searched online for stories about strange experiences in the Rockies, but nothing came close to what I'd gone through. Then, 2 weeks later, I heard it again. The beeping. It was faint at first, coming from somewhere in my house. I searched every room, every drawer, but I couldn't find the source. It grew louder, echoing through the walls, until I couldn't take it anymore. I ran out of the house and didn't return for days. Even now, I hear it sometimes. In the middle of the night, when everything is still. A faint, rhythmic beeping, reminding me of that day in the woods. It was already past midnight when I found myself driving down a deserted stretch of highway in Wyoming. The night was thick with fog, and the only sound was the hum of the tires on the wet road. I had been on the road for hours, heading home after visiting some friends in Colorado. The highway stretched out in front of me, the endless dark road feeling both comforting and suffocating at the same time. The world outside seemed to be swallowed by the thick fog, leaving me with just the headlights of my car and the harsh glow of the dashboard to keep me company. The rain had started earlier in the evening, a light drizzle that soon turned into a downpour, forcing me to keep my wipers on full speed. The road was slick, and the visibility was nearly zero. I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease, as though the road was stretching into an abyss, with no end in sight. The occasional rumble of thunder only added to the sense of isolation. There were no other cars, no lights from nearby towns, just me, the highway, and the storm. I had been on this road before, several times in fact. But tonight, something felt different. The weather, the silence, the way the road seemed to go on forever. It was as if I had entered another world. I had passed the last exit for miles, and now I was in the middle of nowhere. The only thing to guide me was the faint yellow line in the middle of the road and the occasional sign that seemed to materialize out of the mist, only to disappear behind me. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 1 a.m. My eyes were starting to grow heavy. I needed to stop and take a break. Just a few minutes to stretch my legs and shake off the fog of fatigue. But there was nothing around. No exits, no gas stations, nothing but the open road. I was starting to regret not stopping sooner when I noticed a faint light up ahead. It was a diner, or at least I hoped it was. I could see its neon sign flickering weakly in the rain, barely visible through the mist. I pulled off the highway and parked in front of the diner. The lot was empty, which struck me as strange for such a late hour. There was something eerie about it, the lack of other vehicles, the way the diner seemed to loom out of the mist like a mirage. But I was too tired to think much of it. I needed a break. I stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at my skin as I walked toward the door. The bell above the entrance jingled softly as I entered. The smell of stale coffee and fried food filled the air, and I saw an older man sitting at the counter, his back to me. He didn't look up as I walked in. The place was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that pressed against your eardrums, making you feel like you were the only person left in the world. I walked up to the counter and took a seat. The man behind the counter finally looked up. His eyes were a dull gray, and there was a strange, unreadable expression on his face. "Coffee?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. I nodded, grateful for the warmth. "Yeah, coffee sounds good." The man nodded and turned to pour me a cup, but he didn't say another word. The silence between us stretched on, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was an odd energy in the room, as if it was waiting for something. The air felt thick, and the flickering neon lights outside seemed to cast a strange glow on everything. As I sipped my coffee, I noticed something else. The man didn't move. He just stared straight ahead, his hands resting on the counter in front of him. His eyes were fixed on the window, watching something outside, but there was no sign of anyone else. No other cars passed by, no sounds of footsteps on the pavement. It was like the world had stopped outside. "Where is everyone?" I asked, breaking the silence. The man didn't look at me. He just muttered something under his breath. "They never come back." I raised an eyebrow, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. "What do you mean?" He slowly turned his head toward me, his eyes still dull. "Anyone who drives down this road, they don't come back." "Not really." "Not the same. Something out there keeps them. Keeps everyone who gets too close." I felt a chill run down my spine, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. "What are you talking about?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to the window, staring into the darkness. I followed his gaze, but all I could see was the rain, the mist, and the faint outline of the road. There was nothing there. Nothing but the storm. I shook my head, unsure whether he was just another crazy person or if there was something more to his words. I couldn't focus on it for long. I had to keep moving. I finished my coffee quickly and stood up, ready to leave. But as I reached the door, the man spoke again. This time, his voice was barely a whisper. "You'll see it soon. You'll feel it. You won't be able to ignore it." I didn't know what to say. I walked out of the diner, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling gnawing at my gut. I got back into my car, the engine starting with a loud roar as I pulled back onto the highway. The storm had only grown worse. The rain beat against my windshield in relentless waves, and the fog had become even thicker. I could barely see the road ahead, the headlights casting long, wavering shadows across the pavement. I drove for what felt like hours. My eyes were getting heavy again, and I fought to stay awake, focusing on the road. But then, in the distance, I saw something. A figure on the side of the highway, standing still in the fog. It was a man. He was tall, thin, and wore a dark coat, his face hidden beneath a hood. He didn't move as I approached, just stood there, staring into the mist. I slowed down, uncertain of what to do. I felt a strange pull, as if something was guiding me toward him. But as I got closer, I saw the figure's eyes, pale, lifeless, like those of the man in the diner. Suddenly, the figure darted out into the road, directly in front of my car. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as I came to a stop just inches from him. But when I looked up, there was no one there. The road was empty. Not a trace of the man. My heart pounded in my chest, and my hands shook as I gripped the wheel. I quickly turned around, desperate to get away. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, nearly 30 miles away. I've never driven down that road again.